Alrighty. What is up, everybody? Welcome to the Wayfarers Christian Church Sunday evening live stream. If you're tuning in with us live, I'm super excited to see all of y'all tuning in and joining us for this Sunday service. If you're watching it later, totally understand as well. I think I've mentioned a few times I'm kind of a big basketball fan, so the NBA All-Star Game is going on tonight at this exact same time. So if you are watching with us live, I respect you for making the correct decision and valuing church above something like the NBA All-Star Game. I'm not sure I would have been as good as you, but I don't know. Maybe you're not a basketball fan and you're just wanting to tune in anyways. Whatever your reason is, I'm super excited, super happy, and super glad that you have decided to tune in with us today. My name is Nick Griffin. I am the lead pastor here at Wayfarers Christian Church. And if you've been tuning in over the last few weeks, we have been going through a sermon series where we have been really looking deeply at the words of Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount specifically. And this week we have kind of reached a pinnacle. We're kind of at the culmination of the what I think is kind of the center of everything that Jesus wants to say in the Sermon on the Mount specifically. And so I'm really excited about getting to dive into this passage. And so we thought, we're changing things up. There's no reason, there's no rules to how we do this necessarily, especially at a new church plant. And I'm just so excited to get into it. We're just going to jump straight into the sermon right at the very beginning. And I think there's going to be some really cool things that you're going to be able to get out of it. I'm excited, like I said, about getting into this very important central passage in the Sermon on the Mount. But before we jump into all of that, I just want to introduce the passage itself to you. So let's play that passage from Jacob, our online outreach minister. He read the passage here. Let's go ahead and play it.
Matthew 5, verses 43 through 48 says this. You have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. He causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good. He sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? And if you greet only your own people, what are you doing more than others? Do not even the pagans do that? Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect.
All right, so like I said, this is central to the Sermon on the Mount. I think this is a really important and a really awesome passage to focus on specifically, just because it is especially difficult for us. It's especially difficult for a whole bunch of different reasons. But one of the things that is the most interesting to me whenever I read this passage is just the language Jesus uses specifically, and the fact that he brings up just the fact that we are called to specifically love our enemies. Now, I don't know about you, but I as I was trying to prepare for this sermon, I was trying to think through, do I really have enemies specifically? I can't think of any specific enemies that I might have. I was trying to remember, and I don't remember exactly where this moment happened. I believe it was whenever I was helping my mom. My mom, she works in the public school systems here in Memphis, and she used to do this summer kind of volunteer situation where she would help out and take care of little kids that were in kind of this summer schooling program. And I needed some volunteer hours one year, so I decided I was going to go and help her in this after-school summer school program with a lot of these kids. And again, I'm not 100% sure this is where this story happened, but as far as my memory can tell, I'm pretty sure it was one of these summers when I was volunteering with my mom, helping out with some of these little kids. They were maybe, first or second grade, somewhere in there. And I have joked several times that I've kind of been like I was just born like a 55-year-old man. I've never been super great with kids or with teenagers. There's been lots of times where churches have been like, "Hey, Nick, you're young. You should come do our youth ministry or something like that." And I've always emphasized with them, you just really do not want me to do that. I'm not good with teenagers. I'm not good with kids. This was one of those situations where I was helping my mom out, and I was trying to get some volunteer hours for something that I needed specifically. But one of the moments I remember that was just so funny was that I'm sitting there awkwardly trying to hang out with the kids, awkwardly sitting there trying to help the kids out, and my one of the kids, they were just asking each other different like get to know you questions, and the different kids were asking each other specific questions, and it's so interesting just to see the way that kids' brains works and the kind of questions that they might ask. A lot of them were really, really funny, really interesting questions, but at one point one of the kids turns over to me and he says, "Hey, Mr. Nick, who's your arch nemesis?" Which is like the funniest like little kid question to ask ever, because in that moment I was like, who is my arch nemesis? And I was trying to convince him, I don't think I have an arch nemesis, and he just could not believe it. No, everybody has an arch nemesis. This is kind of his point that he was making, and I just sitting there thinking, this idea of like an enemy, of like your arch enemy, of your arch nemesis, something kids are familiar with. Obviously, you got cartoons, you got superheroes. There's always like the ultimate enemy, the ultimate bad guy of everything that you are doing. And you got your Batman and you got your Joker. There's always a specific kind of ultimate enemy individually for every single hero in a story. And so obviously when the kids think it through, that seems like a great question for him to ask, to get to know me. Who is your arch nemesis? And I just sit there and talk to him and convince him over a long stretch of time that I could not remember, or that I did not have one. And I don't know if he was ever fully convinced, but I just had to sit there and convince him. No, I don't have an arch nemesis. This idea of enemies, of having a specific enemy in our lives, is something that we're not necessarily used to talking about. But that language, even though it's not common for us, it is super common in the Bible. You see it here in Jesus's in this passage in the Sermon on the Mount, in Jesus's words here. But you also see it kind of all throughout the Bible. There's a lot of the Psalms where David or another psalmist will specifically mention their enemies, and they will specifically mention their desire to have God judge their enemies, and that'll be like a major central focus for them. And that language of having an enemy, it sounds archaic, it sounds old school, it sounds really like Bible-y, but the concepts of it and the ideas that we can gain out of understanding these passages, I think are very, very, very applicable to us today. But because it is so weird, because it's not an idea that we talk about, because it's not something that I would assume many of you are not able to immediately think of in your mind, who is your arch enemy? Before we kind of really get into unpacking this passage, I wanted to make sure that we would kind of lay out some of the reasons why I think we have a hard time relating to this passage in our culture today. See, there's a lot of specific things that surround how we relate to our enemies that are different for us in our culture than they would have been in Jesus's time, or even before that in other Bible cultures. And so there's some very specific things that we have to understand about our enemies before we can really understand what Jesus is saying. And the very first point, the very first one is really simple. It's something that is common in Jesus's time, but less common in our time. And I think the reality of the fact is that this is one of the most important things to really apply this passage, is that we have to know our enemy. That is the first point. You have to know your enemy. And let me explain what I mean by that a little bit, and why this is a problem. The reason this is a problem in our culture today, and when I say in our culture, I'm talking about, I guess specifically, I would just call it like American evangelical Christian culture. That's the culture I grew up in, and I assume many of you have grown up in or been a part of in the United States today. And one of the main issues that I have seen in a lot of American evangelical culture is that we are very good and very clear defining enemies. Sometimes we're very, very clear about defining who the enemies are. I've grown up in church. I've heard a whole bunch of different sermons from different pastors and different people that are just very honest, clear, direct about who the enemies are, and I'm sure many of you could mention the clear enemies that you've heard in church. People will mention specific political parties. They'll mention the Democratic Party or just liberals in general. They might also mention abortion clinics or groups like Planned Parenthood and specifically target those as their enemies. They might also mention things like, maybe the scientific establishment, maybe certain biological scientists who are pushing certain evolutionary agendas. The list could go on and on. They're very common, very clear. We all know who the enemies of American evangelicalism are. But one of the issues that I've started to notice is that we're very good and clear about defining those enemies. But in our day-to-day lives, we really do not know our enemies at all. The best way I can think to explain what this kind of looks like is actually kind of a funny and interesting example. I was reading an article on my phone a few weeks ago that was just really funny, and it was laying out the fact that if you look through the history of medieval art, specifically art from the medieval times, and even kind of into the Renaissance times, there's this really funny phenomenon that you kind of see over and over and over again, which is that those medieval artists apparently had no idea how to draw lions. It's really funny. We've got a few pictures of them that we can put up on the screen, and Adrian's going to kind of scroll through some of these. But these are some horrible pictures and depictions of lions. These are all from medieval paintings, and all of them look just wild, completely different, completely goofy. This is their attempts of all these medieval artists of drawing lions. And there's been a lot of speculation as to why are they so bad at drawing lions. If you look at horses or other animals or other things that'll show up in medieval art, they're like really, really good art. They're good at painting humans and painting horses and painting birds and all this kind of stuff. But for some reason, the lions just look ridiculous. And one of the kind of speculations that a few people have is that a lot of medieval art is European art. It's art from the continent of Europe, where natively there are no lions. Lions don't exist natively in Europe. Where lions exist is natively, is in the continents of Africa and parts of the Middle East and parts of Asia. That's where you get lions. And those lions end up being very popular in a lot of, Greek and Roman literature from back in the time. From the kings would know about these kind of mythical beasts almost in their minds from these faraway lands. They knew that lions existed, but the fact was most of these artists had just never seen a lion in person. So when it came time to paint or to draw or to illustrate that lion specifically, they were kind of just going off of a general description, maybe something they had read in a book, maybe something that they had heard from a different person, maybe something that was just kind of a general description of what that lion might look like. But they themselves had no personal and direct experience with a lion. So when they go to draw it, when they go to show what it looks like, it ends up looking kind of ridiculous, kind of wild. That's what a lot of these medieval paintings of lions looked like. And I think that that's the same problem that I am finding over and over and over again that we have in the American church today. We are a lot like those medieval artists who are very, very good at clearly drawing lions when we may not actually have ever seen them or known them before. And kind of what I mean by that a little bit is just that we don't have any personal relationships with a lot of these people that we would consider our enemies. I had a conversation about this a few months ago with our teaching pastor, with Noah Randolph, and he was talking to me about how both of us really felt this very strongly whenever we both worked at this coffee shop we started called Avenue Coffee. The kind of thing that we were noticing over and over and over again about our lives, both of our lives specifically, is that all that time that we spent working at the coffee shop, we started to kind of interact and get to know a lot of people who had a lot of perspectives or who represented a lot of these worldviews that in our church days, in our early church days growing up, these people would have been defined clearly as our enemies. And what was so surprising to us is that as we got to know those people, as we got to know them better, as we got to know them in real life, we realized that the stories we had been told about those kinds of people in church or from a pastor or somebody specifically, they didn't line up with the realities of those people that we met in the coffee shops. We would meet these people who were our enemies according to growing up in church, and we would realize that the stories and the descriptions of these types of people that we had been told in church just did not line up with the reality. In our experience, the descriptions of these types of people in church were about as similar to the actual people as some of these wild pictures of medieval lions are to actual lions. There might be some similarities, there might be some things that kind of overlap, but just when it comes to the reality of exactly what those people are like, we did not know them. We did not really know what they were like. And that created all kinds of issues kind of in our lives. And this is something that I've seen kind of play itself out over and over and over again, not just for me and Noah, but for a lot of Christian kids who grow up in the church. You see, there's a whole bunch of different reasons for why this disconnect has started to happen between the descriptions of people that we get in church versus the actual people that we will meet. But I think one of the beginnings of that disconnect is a good thing. It was a good thing that people wanted to do, which is that when you had kind of the rise of American evangelicalism in a lot of the late 80s, early 90s, you had a lot of parents that were wanting to just truly protect their innocent children from being exposed to things that might harm them. They wanted to kind of make sure that they only watched television or only listened to songs or only interacted with other Christian kids or with Christian music or with Christian movies. And deep down, I think that the desire to do that, I completely understand. It's a good thing that you want to protect your children from being exposed to things that they don't have the development and capacity to really process. I've been thinking that a lot myself. I have a son. He's just over a year old now, and I've been thinking that already as he's getting older. How can I be very intentional and very wise about how I'm parenting him and making sure that I'm not exposing him to things that he does not need to be exposed to? But I think sort of an unintended consequence that happened from all these parents wanting to protect their children, is that the easiest way that they found to do that was just to separate their children from the rest of the world, from the people around them. And so that ended up becoming all sorts of things, like maybe a lot of homeschooling became a big thing, a lot of private schools specifically. You started to have a lot of just Christian youth groups, a lot of church groups, church leagues, just a lot of specific, separate Christian subculture things. I've kind of experienced that tension myself a little bit as I've talked to other kids who didn't grow up in the church, and all of the TV shows and all of the cultural things that were so important and so foundational to my childhood, they aren't familiar with. They have no idea about it. I'll talk about some of my favorite VeggieTales cartoons, a cartoon show that it's a Christian show for kids, and the non-Christian kids had no idea what I was talking about. They had not grown up with a lot of that cultural moment. And as you started to kind of get this separation, I feel like the gap has just continued to widen more and more. This has actually been proven as people have been looking through. They've been doing studies just kind of showing that in the last few decades especially, and this is true of everybody, but it has been especially true of Christians in the church, over and over and over again, we are getting to a place where people do not know anyone in their immediate circles that does not agree with everything they believe. Basically, there are Christians who don't know anybody, who are not close friends with anybody, or not even acquaintances with anybody, who is not also a Christian, also conservative politically, also about the same socioeconomic class as them. Basically, we're getting more and more segmented into these small groups of people where everybody that surrounds us believes and knows the exact same things as us. And like I said, at a glance, that seems like a good thing to a lot of people. People are kind of happy about that. Yeah, I don't have all this tension. I'm not trying to deal with a lot of people who believe things differently than me. But ultimately, I really don't think that this is helpful. And I really don't think that that's even necessarily helpful for children. Like I said, I understand the impulse. I understand the desire. I'm a new father myself, and I completely understand the desire to protect your children from unnecessary danger. But as I've thought through a lot of these issues, something that has continued to come to mind is a story that my dad used to tell me all the time. You see, I've mentioned before, my parents, both of my parents, they were missionaries in the country of Uruguay in South America, which is where I was born. I was born in Uruguay. And the ministry that my parents used to do is that they were ministering specifically to a very poor area of the capital city of Uruguay. So the capital city of Uruguay is called Montevideo. In the center of Montevideo, there's this massive park. Think imagine like Central Park in New York City. There's this huge park in the center of Montevideo that's about that big, about as big as Central Park. And at the time that my parents were in Uruguay, this park had kind of become like a huge slum, just like the poorest of the poorest people in Uruguay, who couldn't afford housing in any of the other parts of the capital city. They had just all collected in this big park, and they had built these like shacks and these tents, and it was just this huge sprawling slum, and that's where these people lived. And most of these people, they made their livings basically by going around the city in these horse-drawn carts because they couldn't afford cars. So they would have these carts being pulled by horses, and they would just dig through trash. That was how they made their living. They would dig through trash trying to find things that were maybe able to be resold, things that were valuable, things that they could take and fix up and resell. And that's how they would kind of make their living, is just going through the trash, taking these carts, picking things up from other people's trash. And it was in this community that my parents decided that they wanted to minister. This whole slum in the park was called the Cantegril, and my parents started a ministry in the Cantegril. And so what they did is they went around kind of door to door to a lot of these shacks and a lot of these tents, and they asked the people, what would be the one thing that we could do for you that would be the most helpful in helping you to get out of the Cantegril? What is the thing we could do for you that could help you get out of here? And over and over and over again, the people said, we need somebody who can take care of our kids so that we can try to find a better job, so that we can go out and get a better job than just digging through the trash, so we can go out and find more of a respectable, real job. We just need childcare, basically. And so my parents, they started a daycare ministry there in the Cantegril, in the middle of this slum in Uruguay, where they would take care of all of the children of a lot of the people that lived in this slum. And it was really just, and they would do it for free. It was just completely a ministry that they did. And it just really was this awesome thing that helped a lot of those people finally break the cycles that were keeping them there and get out of that slum. But the story I thought of specifically was one that my dad always used to tell about when I was first born. You see, I was born in Uruguay, and my mom had a lot of medical complications whenever I was born. And so I ended up being born really premature. I was born a few months earlier than expected. And this was a pretty dangerous thing in the country of Uruguay. It's a third world country. They don't have access to all of the same medicine that we have here in the States. And so they weren't sure if I was even going to survive as a premature baby. I was very premature and very small. And they did everything they could, and obviously I'm here today. I survived. I made it. But the story my dad said was about just the very first week after they had been able to bring me out of the hospital. I had spent like 3 or 4 months in the hospital after being born because of how premature I was. They had me in an incubator. They were wanting to make sure I was okay. And after months of being in the hospital, the very first week that they had me as a newborn premature baby, The very first thing they did was that they went to an evening prayer service in the Cantegli, in that slum part of the city. And all of the kids that came from the daycare and all of their families and parents were there, and they all wanted to come over, and they all wanted to come and see me, see the newborn baby. And all the kids were coming, and they were like stroking my face and telling my mom how cute I was as a baby and all this kind of stuff. And my mom says that there was another lady that kind of came up to her and was just like, "You can't do this. This is horrible. These kids are so dirty. Their parents spend their lives digging through the trash. Your child is premature. This is so dangerous. There's no way that you should allow them to get this close to your child." But my parents, they both had this very interesting attitude that I'm starting to realize is almost countercultural, where they were just convinced that, no, this is actually the best place that I could be. They said they just had this real trust that the Lord was going to protect me, and they wanted to introduce me to the kids that were at the center of their heart and the center of their ministry there in Uruguay. And that's really been the attitude that my parents have taken throughout a lot of my life. They have been just really, really encouraging me to pursue things that people would consider maybe somewhat dangerous. I've been able to travel all over the world with my parents. I've been able to travel to areas and parts of the world that are really dangerous, and that I think specifically a lot of parents would have tried to keep their kids away from. They would have tried to protect their kids from being exposed to these people, to these things, and to these parts of the world. But my parents, they had the kind of opposite attitude. Their attitude was that these are the places, these are the people who have the most need. And one of the best things that we can do for our child is expose him to these parts of the world and to these people specifically. And this is something that I'm very thankful for. I think it has really helped to open my perspectives, to change my minds, and to allow me to be a lot more open-minded about what other people in other places might be like. It's something that I have been, just like I said, very thankful for, something that has very much helped me. And it's a frustration that I've had when I've seen other Christian parents kind of have the opposite attitude, this attitude of their ultimate job as parents is to protect their children from all danger that exists. My dad has had this frustration over and over again in the last few years as he has been working here at the college that we broadcast from, this college called Mid-South Christian College. My dad is the president of the college here, Mid-South Christian College. It's part of the hookup is why we get to use the chapel space. You know, you got a little family connection there. And one of the frustrations that my dad has always had is when he has talked to teenagers and to kids who are wanting to come and to study here at the college, where it's a college that focuses on training ministers and preachers and worship leaders. And he'll talk to these teenagers that are just super committed, wanting to help, to do ministry, to help in the church and to serve the Lord. They'll become super convinced that they want to come to Bible college. Maybe that's at a camp. Maybe they find out about the school somehow and they just want to do it. And my dad has had this experience over and over and over again where the kids will become convinced, but their Christian parents are the ones that actually convince them to do something else, to get a secular degree, to go and get another job. They'll mention all kinds of reasons about, like, well, you know, ministers don't make enough money, or for the kids that want to do missions, it's like, oh, you can't go to those parts of the world. Those parts are so dangerous. What could happen to you? And just this desire as parents to provide safety for their kids. It can, I really think, in a lot of ways, backfire. And I worry sometimes that these parents are keeping the kids from actually doing what the Lord desires for them to do. The Lord has asked a lot of people to do a lot of very dangerous and seemingly illogical things. But there's a lot of blessings that have come from them pursuing that. But how does this connect all the way back to this idea of knowing your enemies? Well, I think that is the difficulty that we have these days. In our desire to provide safety and security for our friends and for our family, I worry that we have sectioned them off and we have not allowed them to actually get to know people who believe differently than them, who have ideas that are different than the ones they have. And the problem is that I've kept seeing it play out over and over and over again, was that when a lot of these kids who had grown up being told one thing about who their enemies were would get maybe to college, get into some other job, or get into an area where they were finally experiencing for the first time, finally getting to know those quote-unquote enemies. And when they realized that they were nothing like what they had been taught in church, when they realized that those enemies were maybe really nice people, were completely different than the examples they had been given in church, unfortunately, it caused a lot of these Christian kids to question their parents, to question the church, to question Christianity as a whole. And I saw it play out over and over and over again in the college ministry I did. These kids would be confronted with the realities of these enemies. They would find that they weren't as bad as they thought they were, and their response was to throw away Christianity, the church, and everything else altogether. I think one of the best things that we can do as Christians is use some wisdom, have the Lord lead us in what we can do, but make sure that we are in a place where we can really get to know and connect with those people who are different than us. I'm not actually denying that some of these people may, in some ways, be enemies of what the Lord is trying to do. There's a lot of people out there who, for a lot of different reasons, are doing things that are very counter to what the Lord is trying to do. But if we are just good about making sure that they actually get to know what those people are like, making sure that we are not misrepresenting those people, and making sure that we just know them as human beings, I think that is the key to really living out this passage of what Jesus says. And so specifically, what Jesus is calling us to here is to love those enemies. And before we can love them, I firmly believe this. You cannot love people that you do not know. So that may mean that you just have to have more relationships with some of those people, have some experiences with some of those people, venture outside of those comfort zones, those safe comfort zones that we have created for ourselves, and just trust the Lord enough to know that when we get out into those dangerous places, maybe rather than it being an opportunity for us to have harm or to have something bad happen to us, we can instead view it as an opportunity to actually live out what Jesus is asking us to do in this moment, in this passage specifically. Jesus is asking us to love our enemies. And this is very countercultural and very, very difficult. It's not something that would have been common to the people of Jesus' day. You can see in the passage, he kind of says, the common thing, the thing that we're all used to is, love the people that are like you, love the people that are your friends, love the people that you care for. And he's just saying, what's so different about that? What's such a big deal about that? Everybody does that. Of course, he says, even the tax collectors, the worst of the worst in their society, even those people love the people that love them. Even the pagans, even all these people that you just look down on, even they do that. That's not new. That's not something that is going to really make a difference in people's lives. But the thing that's going to be weird, the thing that's going to make people really listen, perk up, and figure out exactly what it is that we are doing is when we love our enemies. And I just worry that we have so sheltered ourselves off that we just don't have the opportunity to have those experiences and to get to love and to get to know those enemies. But on top of that, the thing that just has kind of come up to me over and over and over again, and the reason I think this passage is so important, because I really do think a lot of the Sermon on the Mount culminates in this idea of love for your enemies is kind of one of the defining factors of Christianity. It's one of the things that makes Christianity so different from all of the other religions and things that are out there in the world. With Christianity, one of the central tenets of it is loving your enemies. And that can look like a whole bunch of different things. It can mean a whole bunch of different things. Lots of times when people hear this, why can't we all just love each other? People will say, all you need is love. That's what it's all about. And it sounds nice, but what does that specifically look like? What does it specifically look like for us to love our enemies? And this is why I just love that Jesus doesn't just leave us hanging, and he gives us a specific example of what he wants us to do. which is that he wants us to pray for our enemies. And that's the thing he says. He wants us to pray for our enemies. This is one of the most just life-changing things that you can do. And if you just take one thing from the sermon, one thing that I want to encourage you to do is just live this out. Do this exact thing that Jesus is asking you to do. Whoever comes up in your mind, whoever the people are that you just know that bother you, whether they are people you know specifically or not. They might be political figures. They might be people that you just firmly disagree with. They might be people that you are aware of that you know are doing very dangerous and hurtful things to other people in the world. One of the most just life-changing things you can do is to make it a point to pray for them. There's this phrase I see go around online all the time that basically just says, it is really, really, really hard to hate somebody that you are praying for. And so it's a simple application, but that's what I want us to do. I want us to find time, whether it's in your daily prayer time or whatever it is. I want you to this week take a specific moment, take a specific section of time to pray for your enemies, whatever they may be. That's one of the most practical and most important things that we can do. So I wanted to end today with just a time of prayer specifically. We're going to do kind of an interesting, different type of prayer, one that I think is really helpful and really useful, but that can also just kind of help get our hearts in the right place and in the right frame of mind. The way this prayer works is that it's called a prayer of examine. It's something that's really common in a lot of other denominations, but it's not necessarily so common in some of the church backgrounds that I've been a part of. But the way that this prayer works is that there's just a series of different questions that we are going to ask ourselves. There are all these questions to ask ourselves about our day. It's a great thing to do at the end of the day. I love that our church service kind of comes at the end of a Sunday, so we can look back through the day and try to think through the high points and low points of our day. And so this prayer is going to ask us a lot of specific questions to help us get our hearts in the right place and really understand both the good and the bad things that have happened to us this day. And I'm hopeful that if we do that, it'll get our hearts in the right place, get our minds in the right place. And at the very end, we can take a time specifically to do exactly what Jesus said here, and to pray for those that those that are our enemies in whatever way that may be, however you may define that in your own life. I want to get our head and our hearts in the right place, and then use that kind of headspace that we're in to just in this moment today practice exactly what Jesus said. It's just a few questions. It's just going to take a few seconds for each question. But I asked Jacob, our online outreach minister. It's one of those titles, We're figuring it out. But I asked Jacob to come up and walk through these questions. He's going to kind of ask some of them, give you a few seconds for you to contemplate, think through each one of these, really kind of try to answer these questions and see what has been going on in your day. And then at the end, I'm going to ask Jacob to help lead us through a prayer and just to pray for our enemies specifically, as Jesus said. And while Jacob is praying that prayer, I would encourage you to do the same thing. Once you get your heart in the right place, use that time, pray along with Jacob, and let's pray for our enemies and just enact exactly what Jesus said. It's weird. I think if we can do this, if we can do it well, it's going to be one of the most life-changing things we can possibly do. This is just one of those tiny, practical, you just do this one thing, I promise you it's going to make a huge difference. And I think that's why it's so important to the Sermon on the Mount. If we do this one thing and we do it regularly, it's going to really change us as human beings, and I think it will make a huge impact and difference for the kingdom. So I'm going to turn it over to Jacob now to do that part.
So let's take a quick second to think and to prepare ourselves for these questions that we're about to go through. As I consider the day, for what am I least grateful? Where am I invited to follow God more closely? When did I give and receive the least love today? When did I have the least sense of belonging? What was today's low point? As I consider the day, what am I most grateful? When did I give and receive the most love today? When did I feel most alive today? When today did I have the greatest sense of belonging to God? When did I have the greatest sense of belonging to others? What was today's high point? Will you pray with me? Father, as we come into your presence, Lord, we want to take into heart and to put into action what Jesus says in Matthew 5, to love our enemies and to pray for them. So I want to take a second to pray blessings over those who are working against the church, Lord, around the world, in this country, in our neighborhood, that we pray for those who curse us. Lord, I pray blessings on them. Lord, I ask that you remind us and put it in our hearts to do this daily, to remember to bless those that curse us, to love our enemies, to love those who may not like us and that we may not like them. But we move past ourselves and we love them because you love them, Lord. Be with us this week as we try to put this into practice. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Have a good week, everybody.